On the morning of January 15th, 1974, the Otero family was starting their day in their Wichita, Kansas home. Joseph Otero Sr., 38, his wife Julie, 33, and two of their children, Joseph Jr., 9, and Josephine, 11, were still at home. The older children had already left for school. An intruder approached the house. Before entering, he cut the phone lines to ensure no one could call for help. He then entered the Otero home, catching the family by surprise. He claimed he only wanted money, food, and their car to make a quick getaway. The family, confused and terrified, complied, hoping they would be spared if they did what he asked. However, the man had no intention of letting them live. The intruder quickly began binding each member of the family. He tied their wrists and ankles tightly with cords, immobilizing them. Joseph Otero Sr., a strong and protective father, tried to stay calm and cooperate, hoping it would save his family. But the man was in complete control, and things soon turned deadly. The attacker started with Joseph Otero Sr. He took him and Julie into the bedroom, separated from the children, and strangled Joseph with a cord. Joseph tried to fight back, but the intruder was too strong. Joseph lost consciousness and died. Next, the killer turned to Julie Otero, the mother. She too was strangled with a cord, helpless to save herself or her family. After a brief struggle, she also succumbed and died beside her husband. The killer then went to the children. Joseph Otero Jr., the youngest at just 9 years old, was tied up and terrified. He pleaded for his life, but the man ignored him. The intruder placed a plastic bag over Joseph Jr.'s head, suffocating him. Despite the boy's struggles, he was soon motionless. Lastly, the killer took Josephine Otero, 11 years old, down to the basement. In an act of prolonged cruelty, he hung her from a pipe, using a rope around her neck. She was left to slowly die by strangulation, alone in the dark basement. After the murders, the intruder collected small items from the house as trophies, and then left quietly, unnoticed by anyone in the neighborhood. The Otero family's brutal murder was not discovered until later that day, when the Otero's older children returned home from school. The shocking crime scene left investigators puzzled, as there seemed to be no motive and very little evidence. For years, the Otero murders remained unsolved. It wasn't until 2005 that the killer was finally identified as Dennis Rader, who had come to be known as the BTK Killer, a name he gave himself. Rader admitted that the Otero family was his first target in a series of killings he would go on to commit. His detailed confession revealed the cold and calculated way he had planned and carried out their deaths. The Clutter family, a family full of wealth. Both parents, Herbert Clutter and Bonnie Clutter, along with their 15-year-old son, Kenyon Clutter, and 16-year-old daughter, Nancy Clutter, were sleeping when two intruders broke in the middle of the night. The intruders went to their father, woke him up first, and tied him up in the basement. Then, the intruders grabbed the daughter and also tied her in the basement. Afterward, they went to the mother's room and tied her up there, and then tied the son in his room. After tying them all up, the intruders went back to the basement and demanded money. The father pleaded, saying he didn't keep any money in the house. The intruders grew angry, insisting they knew about a safe in the house. The father replied, swearing there wasn't any safe. and that the information they'd heard was wrong. The intruders, getting angrier, started shouting and screaming until one of them ordered the other to kill the father and leave no evidence behind. One of the intruders went up to the father, slit his throat, and then shot him in the head. The daughter, crying as she witnessed her father's death, kept pleading, but the intruder shot her in the head, killing her instantly. After the brutal attack, they went upstairs to the son's room and shot him in the head, killing him instantly. Finally, they went to the mother's room and shot her in the head, killing her as well. With the entire family murdered, the intruders scavenged around the house but couldn't find anything valuable. They ended up taking only $50, a pair of binoculars, and a transistor radio before escaping successfully. The next morning, Nancy's friend came to visit her and was shocked to find the family's deceased bodies. The police arrived and started a large investigation. After a couple of days, Richard Dick Hickok and Perry Smith were captured as prime suspects. They had met in prison, where Dick heard about the Clutter family from a fellow inmate who had worked for them. The inmate told Dick that the Clutters were wealthy and had a safe with large amounts of cash on their farm. After their release from prison, Dick convinced Perry to help him rob the family. They were caught after their former cellmate informed the police about their possible involvement in the Clutter case. After being interrogated, both eventually confessed to the murders. In trial, both Dick and Perry were sentenced to the death penalty and were later executed. In the early hours of July 23, 2007, a horrifying crime took place in Cheshire, Connecticut. The Petit family, consisting of Dr. William Petit, his wife Jennifer Hawk Petit, and their two daughters, Haley and Michaela. The two perpetrators first targeted the family when the perpetrators saw Jennifer and Michaela shopping at a grocery store the day before. He followed them home, noticing the family's house and deciding to return later that night to commit the crime. At around 3 a.m., they broke into the Petit home. They entered silently through an unlocked door in the basement. Inside, Dr. William Petit had fallen asleep on the couch. The attackers found him first, striking him with a baseball bat and leaving him badly injured and tied up in the basement. Next, they went upstairs, where they found Jennifer and her two daughters asleep. The intruders tied them up, keeping them separated in their bedrooms. Over the next several hours, the family remained held captive while the attackers came up with a plan to steal money. Early that morning, the men forced Jennifer to go to the bank and withdraw $15,000, threatening her that they would harm her family if she didn't comply. Jennifer, scared for her husband and children, went to the bank and managed to tell a teller what was happening. The bank immediately called 911, alerting the police, but they didn't rush to enter the home, likely thinking they had more time to handle the situation. Back at the house, the violence grew worse. After tying up both daughters, the assailants violated and harmed. Then the mother returned to the house, resorting in a non-confrontation deliverance. But the perpetrators grew angry and strangled Jennifer, killing her instantly, gripping them with terror by covering their rooms with gasoline for evidence reasons. They then lit the house on fire. Unfortunately, the daughters of the Petit family couldn't escape due to being tied up and died a torturous death. Luckily, Dr. William Petty managed to escape, running out of the house without knowing anything about his daughters. During all this, the police were stationed around the house without alerting the assailants. After the assailants left the house, they attempted to drive away in the Petit family's car, but were stopped and arrested by the police. Both men were identified as Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komisarjevsky, both with criminal histories. They were eventually convicted of multiple charges. They were sentenced to death, but after Connecticut abolished the death penalty in 2015, their sentences were changed to life in prison without parole. The tragedy of the Petit family shocked the entire nation. The case sparked debates about home security, the parole system, and the justice system overall. Dr. William Petit survived the attack and later founded the Petit Family Foundation, which supports education, victims of violence, and people affected by chronic illness. He also became an advocate for victims' rights. This horrific event serves as a reminder of the dangers that can sometimes exist, even in the safety of one's home.